Hello, Happy New Year, Merry 2026-mas. Hope you had a good Christmas. This is Chris. Welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. Last episode for a while, and I'm also alone. Becca is very, very tired, very, very fatigued at the moment. And so it is just me all by my lonesome. Hopefully, you won't hold it too much against me, though. I'm happy to be back. I did a crazy amount of research for this episode, and I learned a lot among the way, including about things like the Númenórean military ranks. And who doesn't want to know about that? So, like I said, let's go back in time. Hello, my name is Chris. This is A Drunk History of Middle-earth, a podcast where I teach my wife and you lovely people about Middle-earth as if we were friends sat in a pub together. Now, if this is your first episode, I heavily encourage you to go back, pick out something you like, and go and start your journey with us there. Something that sounds interesting, go for it. A lot of people seem to think they need to start at episode 1 and go all the way up to this one, which is very interesting because I didn't record them with chronology in mind, and in fact, I do jump around every now and then. But I think there's just some things you can't get around, in human nature is one of them. It always makes me laugh when people say, "Oh, I'm trying to catch up on the episodes." I'm like, "What the fuck do you mean catch up? Like, just pick something you like and go with that." Because that's how I listen to podcasts. I'll see a topic I like and I go, "Oh, I'll listen to that episode." And if it's a series, all right, I'll see the series through, and then I'll move on to something else. I don't feel like I need to keep going every week, but I appear to be the exception rather than the rule for that one. So fair dues. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas and that all is going well and that you can breathe a deep sigh of relief that your family are gone now, the people you love so very much, but put a turkey in the mix and you want to strangle the cunts. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Right, so top of the episode, some news, as I've mentioned, and I've been ettling out for the last few episodes. I'm going to take an extended break after this. This is going to be the last episode for a while. It might be the last episode of the podcast totally, but I don't think so, because there is at least one more episode I'd like to do, but life is hectic at the moment, and it is not letting up. Work is mad. My career has kind of gotten to the point it's not gotten to before. I've been doing a lot of stand-up comedy type stuff as well, and even that like kind of takes a little bit of a backseat because I've started writing again, and I've really enjoyed writing. I've learned a lot from the release of my first book, and a lot about things I want to change going forward as being a writer. Let's just it's the elephant in the room. I was too explicit for the type of story I wanted to tell. And instead it ended up fragmenting my book, which is very interesting to look back on. It was fragmenting my story. So the book I released, The Horror at Beamish Hall, it essentially became two stories, and I didn't realize it until looking back, and I was like, all right, well, when the fuck did I cross over into horny territory and not realize? I tried to be too Clive Barker without realizing that Clive Barker does a lot with imagery and doesn't have to spell out and make things smutty. And I suppose, I don't know, did I just want to write a spank book? Who knows? But that's not really about this podcast, is it? Because from the name, you're probably thinking, oh shit, I've clicked on the wrong episode. No, we are going to talk about Aragorn's heirlooms and equipment. That's today. I think this is the 5th part of our Aragorn series. And this will be the last Aragorn part, the last part of the Aragorn series. There are many, many, many more things you could talk about with Aragorn, and I would love to, but you've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere. So yes, this will be part 5 of Aragorn, which will cover his heirlooms and his gear. So while it is ostensibly related to Aragorn, and it is about Aragorn, we are going to tell a lot of other stories as well, which is always really interesting, because it also brings in some language, some inspiration. We're even going to talk about some cigarettes, which is it's a quick. Can you stop now? Can you take 10 seconds to think about it? I've said we're going to talk about cigarettes. How does that relate to Aragorn? Did you get it? Did you come back here and I mean, if you did, come back and tell me. And if you can hear any explosions in the background, it's okay. I've not relocated to Gaza. It is just the fact that it is New Year's Eve and I live in the UK where everybody wants to set off fireworks whenever we get the chance. So we're going to tell a lot of different stories today from a lot of different parts of Middle-earth, but they're all to do with Aragorn and his heirlooms. Then after this, the podcast will be on an extended break. It'll be so long and thanks for all the fish for a bit while me and Becca continue on with our life. That's getting hectic. That's the recap, and I know it's a little bit of a messy recap, but you know what I'm like. I like to just come here and talk to you. So, we've covered Aragorn over the past 4 episodes, and this is now the 5th. And last episode ended with his death, so, well, where do we go from here? Well, you'll know that he has a lot of really cool things about him, and you know, if any good fantasy story has like the heirlooms, the relics, the magic gear. In fact, any fucking TTRPG game, you know, D&D, Pathfinder app. We play Pathfinder 2nd edition, me and my gaming group. We love that. We're up to the gills in magic gear. And we've talked briefly before about the massive influence that Tolkien and Lord of the Rings had on Gary Gygax and Dungeons and Dragons, and therefore tabletop role-playing game in general, the idea of a party, magic items, people of different professions working together. Like, there is a lot of the DNA of Lord of the Rings that started with those first editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So it makes sense that we'd want to talk about the quote-unquote magic items that Aragorn has, or the items of significance. I might miss one or two. I think I've caught the majority of the main things, but if I have missed something, that is unfortunately going to keep you awake at night. Right, shall we get started with the intro over? I think we should. So we're going to talk about Aragorn's heirlooms and equipment today because it's super storied and has lots of history. However, heads up, the first part, it might sound a little bit familiar because I covered it in, I think, the first episode of the series, where me and Becca had a very long conversation about the Elfstone and Elessar, and about the concept of hope. And so I'm going to have to repeat all that here because I wanted to keep it all in one episode. So for the first time, some of this will sound familiar, and I am consciously taking a section from another episode because it fits here. And I've only got myself to blame because I couldn't stop myself spaffing my load in the first episode, getting excited about everything. All right? So, soz. If you listen to this podcast and you are hardcore about the facts, you are like, shut up, fat man, get to the things I don't know about, then there'll probably be an auto chapter that will tell you when I start talking about the next item. But let's start with the Elfstone / Elessar. So Elessar might be Aragorn's other most well-known name, right? It's Quenya and it means Elfstone. And the Sindarin version of his name, Elfstone, is Ethelan, which Ethel is elf. It's that DH th sound, so Ethel. And San is a way to describe small stones. And in terms of Elfstone and Elessar, it is a weirdly deep topic, so we're going to go into it now. And why is Aragorn called Elfstone? Well, the short answer is that he takes the name from a green jewel that he receives and wears. That's the short answer. But the long answer, that jewel has a massively long history, a couple of choose-your-own-adventure parts, and signifies some mad shit. So it's also called the Stone of Eärendil, and is comprised of one or possibly two great green jewels that also may have healing powers. And there are mysteries surrounding its actual creation. There also may be more than one of these Elfstones. So the Elfstone was perhaps created by Noldor jewelsmiths in the first age of Middle-earth in the hidden city of Gondolin. Hidden city above the Noldor, surrounded by mountains. The fall of it is one of the tragic events of the first age. The jewel was possibly created by Enethil, the jewelsmith. He was an elf who was said to have been named the greatest craftsman amongst the elves after Feanor died. And what sets him apart from the other Noldor more than anything is that Eärendil loved things that grew, plants, trees, flowers. And one of his favourite sights of all time was seeing sunlight between the leaves of trees. So he sets his mind to this. And what he created was said to astonish all who looked upon it. A jewel that was as green as leaves and was able to imprison the clear light of the sun. It said that anyone who looked through the jewel would see marred and broken things as whole and healed. I would love for them to look at my arsehole through that. It is also linked to healing powers in that it said that anyone who wore it would have the power to heal the people they touched. Again, I'd love to get fingered after someone looked at me through that. This is now a bit of Chris speculation, right? But part of me wonders whether this gem or jewel somehow managed to recall some aspect of the music of the Ainur. You know, you remember the universe of Lord of the Rings was created by music, divine music at the start of the world, at the start of time, at the start of creation. And it may glimpse either the world without Morgoth's taint, the devil who put all the, his evil into the world, or perhaps it gives a small glimpse of Arda healed, as it will be when Eru remakes it with the second music of the Ainur, which is going to be the true paradise. So very quickly, to recap that for people who might not be aware, Arda is the name for the world, as in the world where Middle-earth is, our world, and Arda healed is the concept that when this world ends now, when the world ends, that God, Eru Ilúvatar, will remake it again, do the music again, but this time it'll be perfect and everyone will join in. Humans, possibly elves, dwarves, blah, 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 right? And maybe looking through the Elfstone gives people a glimpse of this world, that they are looking through and maybe the healing powers that it is attached to the Elfstone is also possibly the ability to remove Morgoth's taint from people. Who knows? I also wish Becca was here because she always laughs at Morgoth's taint, and it makes me really, really, really want to make a t-shirt where Morgoth's got his ankles around his ears, and it just says Morgoth's taint, which would be lovely. So anyway, I wonder if in some way did Eärendil tap into the woven fabric of creation that allows viewers to see a world that might have been, or a world that will be, or both. And I'll leave it there, but like, it hurts to think about how beautiful that is, right? And I wrote an article a while ago that was published in Amon Hen, which is a Tolkien Society magazine, about the topic of Eru, the god, allowing evil in Middle-earth and there being a reason for it, that he allows evil because that is what will make the people of Middle-earth appreciate a perfect world is one that they've had to struggle and strive and suffer for. And again, if you want to read the article, just message me and I'll send you a copy. But it's I also bring in the Japanese concept of kintsugi, which is where you repair broken things and make it more beautiful than it was originally by using like gold and stuff like that. I think it's a fairly decent piece of writing. Did it in conjunction with a dear friend who passed away called Amanda, and she was the editor for the Tolkien Society, and she encouraged me to flesh all this out. And it was a really, really interesting conversation that me and her had over the course of years. So it's always nice to think about her when I talk about this stuff. It's always nice. So back to the Elfstone though, right? Eärendil gifted the stone, allegedly, to Idril Celebrimbor, who wore it. And because she wore it and she survived the fall of Gondolin, it also survived the fall of Gondolin in the first age and was then passed down to her son, Eärendil, who takes it with him when he eventually travels across the sea to Aman during his journeys. So again, we're still in the speculation part of how the fuck did this stone come to be. So the stone ends up in Valinor, carried by the father of Elrond. Eärendil is also half elven in that his mother Idril married the human Tuor, Okay? So it's said that Eärendil's first memory is of this gem and his mother wearing it while she sung to him. And during his time in Beleriand, Eärendil is said to have used the stone to heal the hurts of many men, beasts, and elves who lived there. So he's putting it to good use, right? And so, allegedly, the Elfstone remained in the blessed lands of Aman in the care of Valar all through the Second Age and about 1,000 years into the Third Age. And legend has it that the Elfstone reappears in the Third Age as Yavanna gave the jewel to Gandalf, or Alorin is his proper name, as a token to the people of Middle-earth that the Valar have not forgotten them. And Gandalf gave the jewel to Galadriel, who made a prophetic remark that she would only hold on to it for a little while until she would pass it on to another who would also be called Elessar or Elfstone. So they're both, the jewel and the person. Now, that's an interesting turn of events because this is where the history is now myth, and we have another version of this. Some attribute the creation of the jewel that Aragorn wears to Celebrimbor, who forged the Rings of Power during the Second Age, who we also briefly covered in the Sauron series on the podcast, right? And he could do with some more fleshing out. Like if I ever do, if I carry on more episodes, then we'll Celebrimbor needs looking at because he's a very important person. But the story is that possibly the original Elfstone has all the history I've just said, but then it stays in the Undying Lands. It stays in Aman. It stays in Valinor. It doesn't come back over the sea with Gandalf. Instead, Galadriel asks Celebrimbor to make her a copy. And in other versions from Unfinished Tales, which obviously is tales Tolkien didn't finish, as you would guess from the title, Celebrimbor, who is in love with Galadriel, makes her another version of the Elfstone that looks better, but is slightly less powerful. It makes everything around Galadriel look fairer, and it's also placed in a silver brooch. Not to say the original might not have been set into a silver brooch, but we just don't know, right? And I'll read out some parts of Unfinished Tales. And this is Galadriel and Celebrimbor talking. And Galadriel says, I am grieved in Middle-earth, for leaves fall and flowers fade that I have loved, so that the land of my dwelling is filled with regret that no spring can redress. How otherwise can it be for the Eldar if they cling to Middle-earth? Said Celebrimbor. Will you then pass over the sea? Nay, she said, Angrod is gone, and Aignor is gone, and Felagund is no more. Of Finarfin's children I am the last, but my heart is still proud. What wrong did the Golden House of Finarfin do that I should ask the pardon of the Valar, or be content with an isle in the sea whose native land was Aman the Blessed? Here I am mightier. What would you do then? Said Celebrimbor. I would have trees and grass about me that do not die. Here is the land that is mine, she answered. What has become of the skill of the Eldar? And Celebrimbor said, Where now is the stone of Eärendil? And Eärthil, who made it, is gone. They have passed over the sea, said Galadriel, with almost all fair things else. But must then Middle-earth fade and perish forever? That is fate, I deem, said Celebrimbor. But you know that I love you, though you turn to Celeborn of the trees. And for that love I will do what I can, if haply by my art your grief can be lessened. But he did not say to Galadriel that he himself was of Gondolin long ago, and a friend of Eärthil, though his friend in most things outrivaled him. Yet if Eärthil had not been, then Celebrimbor would have been renowned. Therefore he took thought and began a long, delicate labour, and so for Galadriel he made the greatest of his works, save the 3 rings only. And it is said that more subtle and clear was the green gem that he made than that of Eärthil, but yet its light had less power. For whereas that of Eärthil was lit by the sun in its youth, already many years had passed ere Celebrimbor began his work, and nowhere in Middle-earth was the light as clear as it had been. For though Morgoth had been thrust out into the void and could not enter again, his far shadow lay upon it. Radiant none the less was the Elessar of Celebrimbor, and he set it within a great brooch of silver in the likeness of an eagle rising upon outspread wings. Wielding the Elessar, all things grew fair about Galadriel until the coming of the shadow of the forest. But afterwards, when Nenya, chief of the three, was sent to her by Celebrimbor, she needed it, as she thought, no more, and she gave it to Celebrian, her daughter. And so it came to Arwen and to Aragorn, who was called Elessar. And at the end it's written, the Elessar was made in Gondolin by Celebrimbor, and so came to Idril and so to Eärendil, but that passed away. But the second Elessar was also made by Celebrimbor and Eregion, at the request of Lady Galadriel, whom he loved, and it was not under the one, being made before Sauron rose again. So we've got different versions of that there. So Eärendil might have made it, and then the original stayed in Aman, or the original came back over the water, or Celebrimbor might have been the one who made it and nobody realised, or Eärendil made the first one, Celebrimbor made the second one. We've got different versions of that and origins, and I'll leave it up to you about which one you think is best. Do you prefer the idea that Celebrimbor made it, or do you like the idea of it being from like this one elf who was just like, peace out, mic drop, did his absolute champ of a item and then just fucking left? Who knows? So regardless of what version it is, right, Galadriel ends up giving the Elfstone to her daughter Celebrian, who then gives it to her daughter Arwen, but at some point it comes back to Galadriel, who gives it to Aragorn. So it went from Elrond's dad to his mother-in-law Galadriel, which is crazy. It's just passing back and forth across a family tree, right? It's just, wow. And when Bilbo Baggins is at Rivendell and is making a song about Eärendil, Aragorn asks him to include the Elfstone as a reference. Bilbo does this, but incorrectly calls it an emerald. And, don't know, is it a bit of prophecy from Aragorn about it? Because Becca also mentions that in when Aragorn is trying to get Frodo to Rivendell, he finds a green stone from oh shit, what's that guy called who killed the Balrog? My mind's gone completely blank. No, it's not Fingolfin. Oh my god, who's like that really powerful elf who killed a Balrog in the Fall of Gondolin? Oh my god. Most we're doing some live research here. I can't believe this. It's I can't. It's right on the edge of my tongue. Who is it? It's not Fingolfin. No, it's not. Was it a Finn? Glorfindel. Oh my god, it was Glorfindel. Right. So when wow, it's been a long time. Can you see why I'm taking a break from the podcast? Like it's not that I'm forgetting. Well, it is that I'm forgetting stuff like this. Like it's just there. Anyway, right. Glorfindel. So when Aragorn is trying to get Frodo to Rivendell, he finds a green stone left by Glorfindel, and he takes it as a good sign. So I wonder if that's all. Becca pointed this out to me, and I didn't realize this, but yeah, could that also be a sign that Aragorn's like, oh shit, green gem, whoop. So anyway, Bilbo makes a poem, and Aragorn asks him to add in a reference. And then I'll read an excerpt of the poem where he does mention the green gem. In panoply of ancient kings and chained rings he armoured him. His shining shield was scored with runes to ward all wounds and harm from him. His bow was made of dragon horn, his arrow shorn of ebony. Of silver was his habergeon, his scabbard of chalcedony. His sword of steel was valiant, of adamant his helmet tall, an eagle plume upon his crest, upon his breast an emerald. And like I said, Galadriel regains control of the gem and gives it to Aragorn when the Fellowship are leaving Lothlorien. So the long answer to that is that Elfstone, or Elessar, is both the name of an incredibly important jewel and a name that Aragorn has. And it's cool. And a whole load of history evolved around something shiny in Tolkien. Kill fucking surprise. Stop me if you've heard that one before. And when the Fellowship are leaving Lothlorien, it appears that Aragorn is a little bit healed by it as well. Because when he's gifted it, it changes him, and it's described as many years of toil falling away from him, and he seems more majestic, as if the Elfstone itself is having a rejuvenating effect on him. And so the Elfstone comes into his possession, where it stays, unless it was inherited by his son Eldarion. But who knows? This is a series about Aragorn, and I can't answer everything because I just don't think it's written. Which, whatever. So that's the Elfstone. That's Elessar. Shall we talk next about some magic swords? I think we should. But first, we're going to start with not just Anduril and Narsil, because, of course, we've got the sword that's broken and remade, and we all love a good fantasy sword, and there's no shortage of named blades and shit in Tolkien, right? But I do want to go slightly off topic and say there's a precedent for Anduril and Narsil, and there's the similar events that happens with this sword, but slightly remixed elsewhere in the Legendarium. And I'm going to put this out there that I don't think Anduril is the best or most interesting sword in the Legendarium. It's very storied, yeah, it's cool, it's got a lineage. But I think the title of most interesting sword goes to Turambar's sentient sword, Gurthang, because it's evil, right? And there's also a bit of a parallel here because Turin's sword was originally called Anglachel and was reforged later into Gurthang. So when Turin kills himself with the sword after finding out he's shagged his sister, the sword also breaks under him. So it's kind of similar to how Narsil broke under Elendil when he died. And you can't help but think that, if you've got two swords that break under people when they fall and die on them, so maybe the overlooked Tolkien commentary is that somewhere in Tolkien's notes, there's just pictures of Elendil and Turin, and they're both big fat bastards. Who knows? So the difference is that unlike Anduril or Narsil, Turin's sword, Gurthang, is sentient, right? And the sword speaks back to Turin, and Turin at the end asks it to kill him swiftly, and the sword says, "Yeah, I will. Yeah, I thirst for your blood because you killed my original master." Cool. And that is, and this part is, as much as Turin's story is, it's inspired by the character Kullervo in the Icelandic saga of the Kalevala, which I recommend anybody reads. So I do just want to say that I don't think Anduril is the coolest sword out there, but there's it's elements of it that get taken and remixed, and we find that a lot. And I think I've got somewhere later on down about some military formations that Isildur used, which mimic what Aragorn did at the Battle of the Morannon, and it's all I was talking to a friend, and I was telling her a little sneak peek about this bit of the script, and I was saying oh, isn't it really interesting how it's really deep? And then the way the conversation went was we both wondered is it really cool and deep, or just does Tolkien just use a formula for every now and then, just mix it up? But regardless, it works. I don't think my criticism would mean anything. There's no criticism to be given, to be fair. Fucking great stories. So I dragged myself away from talking about that sword, and I instead turned myself to this sword, Anduril / Narsil, the sword that is reforged and wielded by Aragorn. And it's one of the most ancient relics in Middle-earth. And again, we return to that theme of post-apocalypse. This is a relic of a bygone age that it couldn't be replicated fully in the Third Age by the dwarves, even though they made the original, right? It was reforged, but the dwarves made it originally, so could they make it again? I don't know, doubtful. So Narsil was the first version of it, was forged in the First Age, although it technically says the deeps of time, by possibly the greatest dwarven smith called Telkar of Nogrod. And Nogrod always seems like a massive racial slur, and I just don't know why. Maybe it's the first syllable, I don't know. But Telkar was well known in his time, and he made swords for the Elven King Thingol of Menegroth. Telkar was a dwarf who belonged either to the clan of the Firebeards or the Broadbeams, because those two clans lived in Nogrod and Belagost and seemed to mix. Like it's not entirely sure who was who, but Telkar was of Nogrod, so it could have been either clan. And Nogrod and Belagost were two cities in the Blue Mountains, which is the range in the far west of Middle-earth that separates it from Beleriand, and Beleriand nowadays under the sea. Telkar was the student of a dwarf called Gamil Zirach, or Gamil the Old, of whom we know even less. Only that the treasuries of King Thingol also held examples of his work. Now, Gamil's name appears to be inspired by Old Norse, just like a lot of dwarfs, because Gamil isn't a known Khuzdul word, but it has a crazy close resemblance to the Old Norse word Gamal, which means old. And given he's called Gamil the Old, that's pretty fucking on the nose for, its inspiration, given his epithet is, a translation of his own name. So he's called Gamil the Old, which means the old. Is it like that? It's like a baseball team. Is it called like the LA Angels or something like that? Where it's or when people talk about the mafia and they say La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, and it's just one of those. Doesn't really make sense. But Zirach is a Khuzdul word which means tine or spike. Tine, Tine, and tine being what the spikes on a fork are called. One of my funnest facts. Anyway, back to Telkar. Let's forget about the old bastard. Forget Gamil. He's gone. Right, back to Telkar. His name is a mystery. He's a dwarf, but his name is Sindarin because the ch or k sound, ch, isn't used in Khuzdul. And there's a guy called Jim Allen, who I think I've talked about before, is very, very extensively researched and written on Tolkien linguistics. He notes in his book, An Introduction to Elvish, that Telkar is very, very similar to the ancient Greek Telkines, the original inhabitants of the island of Rhodes and the famed divine artists and metalworkers. Now, just before I talk about the Telkines, I want to tell you the full fucking name of this book. Jim Allen might be he might be a really renowned Tolkien linguist, but this cunt cannot title a book, right? And I hope I never meet him in real life, because if I'm just talking this shit about him, because I thought the book was just called An Introduction to Elvish. It's not, right? The full title of this book is An Introduction to Elvish and to Other Tongues and Proper Names and Writing Systems of the Third Age of the Western Lands of Middle-earth, as set forth in the published writings of Professor John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Bruh. God damn. I just wanted just to know that. That's crazy. Anyway, Jim Allen says Telkar has a passing resemblance to Telkines. So I was like, okay, I love mythology. Real world mythology. I love researching this shit. Let's go and have a look. So again, I found out the original inhabitants of the island of Rhodes, famed divine artists and metalworkers. There is so many different stories about the Telkines, about how different people view them. Because like some people viewed them with jealousy, so they got a lot of shit talked about them. Some people revered them. Some people couldn't agree who they were, what they did, blah blah blah. But this is all mythology. This is not history, this is mythology, right? So in some accounts, the Telkines were said to have flippers instead of hands and the heads of dogs, which I think someone just saw a seal and was like, oh, do you reckon like someone saw like a shipwreck or like they were walking down a beach one day and they saw a seal and they saw like a table that had washed up from a shipwreck somewhere? And that person was like, I can't believe that mystical creature built that table. What craftsmanship? And then just went and told everyone, like, there's a mythical creature out there that can build tables. Who knows? In some accounts, Poseidon is their father, but in other accounts, they raised Poseidon. And these people were being known as being able to create things such as a trident for Poseidon, and a sickle for Cronus, and the cursed necklace of Harmonia. And they're a pretty complex people in mythology because people talk mad shit about them. Some people would say that they were wizards and demons. Some people would say they were priests of the gods. Some people would say they were just farmers. Some people would say they were the greatest craftsmen. It's a complex people that I couldn't really get into because it's not the purview of this podcast. But it not for the first time I did think, damn, why aren't I doing a mythology podcast? But I am, just a fictional mythology one. Anyway, so Telkar learned, who was possibly influenced by Telkynes, learned from this guy, Gamil Zurak, and it was all good, right? Telkar became famous as fuck. And he was known for 3 items mainly, 3 that you might have heard of. And if you haven't, don't worry about it. I'm going to tell you about them. So we've got 3, the third of which is Narsil, the sword. The first was the knife Angrist, and this might tickle a little behind the nutsack of your brain. And you're like, oh, that sounds a bit familiar. Well, this is the knife that Beren used to cut a Silmaril free from Morgoth's Iron Crown. And this knife was originally wielded by Feanor's son, Curufin. But he tried to jump Beren and Luthien in the forest with his brother, and him and his brother got their ass whooped and their shoes taken. Do you know, like when you see people like in the videos in the ghetto, like they get beat up and they steal their shoes? Like him and his brother talked mad shit to Beren and Luthien, try to kidnap Luthien, and instead they ended up getting their ass whooped and the horses taken off them. It was just fucking fantastic. But this knife was so sharp that it was said that it could, and I quote, iron it would cleave as if it were green wood. That's awesome. But it also, I wonder if Tolkien pointed that out so that he could make what happens next kind of like more poetic, fated kind of thing. Because it cuts, when Beren and Luthien, in the story of Beren and Luthien, Beren cuts, Morgoth's asleep, right? He's been enchanted into a sleep. Beren cuts the first Silmaril out of the crown as if he was cutting through butter, right? It's now to just cut straight through the crown. However, he was only asked to get one. And he gets a bit greedy and he goes for a second one. And it's only when he goes to get the second one that the knife suddenly snaps and a shard of the blade grazes Morgoth's cheek on his face, causing him to stir and start to wake up. The knife is left behind and they leg it, right? And then the knife is lost to time. And I do wonder, is that a little bit of Iluvatar's plan at work? Like, nope, there are plans for the other 2 Silmarils, not right now. You don't get greedy and take them. But Angrist means iron cleaver in Sindarin. Ang, iron, Christ, cleaver. Orcrist is the one to look at here. Orcrist means goblin cleaver. You know, same components, right? Another item that he is renowned for, Telkar, is the Dragon-helm of Dor-lómin. And this was a famous item used during the tale of Turin Tarambar, which is, you know, told in the story of the children of Húrin. And the item was also known as the Helm of Hador, the Dragon Head of the North, the Dragon of Dor-lómin, and the Helm of Húrin, or Húrin, depending on who you are. There's a YouTube creator guy called Tolkien Untangled, Rainbow Dave. He's fucking fantastic, but like he flourishes. Do you know like in Zorro, like when they're fucking waving their swords around? That's how I always imagine Rainbow Dave with like every Tolkien noun. He's like, Húrin. He's fucking fantastic. What a creator. Love that guy. He's one of my like top Tolkien creators. Anyway, the Helm of Húrin. It was made sometime after Glaurung the dragon appeared, the father of all dragons. He was the first dragon. He appeared from the gates of Angband in the first age, the year 260 of the first age, right? And we know it was made after this time because the helm is described in a passage I'm about to read, and it also describes a bit about Telkar's work as well. So this is a bit of a 2 birds 1 cup situation. The Helm of Hador was given into Thingol's hands. That helm was made of grey steel adorned with gold, and on it were graven runes of victory. A power was in it that guarded any who wore it from wound or death, for the sword that hewed it was broken, and the dart that smote it sprang aside. It was wrought by Telkar, the smith of Nogrod, whose works were renowned. It had a visor, after the manner of those that the dwarves used in their forges for the shielding of their eyes, and the face of one that wore it struck fear into the heart of all beholders, but was itself guarded from dart and fire. Upon its crest was set in defiance a gilded image of the head of Glaurung the dragon, for it had been made soon after he first issued from the gates of Morgoth. Often Hador and Galdor after him had borne it in war, and their hearts, the host of Heirlooms, were uplifted when they saw it towering high amid the battle, and they cried, "Of more worth is the Dragon of Dor-lómin than the gold worm of Angband." But in truth this helm had not been made for men, but for Azagal, Lord of Belagost, he who was slain by Glaurung in the year of lamentation. It was given by Azagal to Maedhros as guerdon for the saving of his life and treasure, when Azagal was waylaid by orcs upon the dwarf road in East Beleriand. Maedhros afterwards sent it as a gift to Fingon, with whom he often exchanged tokens of friendship, remembering how Fingon had driven Glaurung back to Angband. But in all Heirloom no head and shoulders was found stout enough to bear the dwarf helm with ease, save those of Hador and his son Galdor. Fingon therefore gave it to Hador when he received the lordship of Dor-lómin. By ill fortune, Galdor did not wear it when he defended Eithel Sirion, for the assault was sudden and he ran bareheaded to the walls and an orc arrow pierced his eye. But Húrin did not wear the dragon helm with ease, and in any case he would not use it, for he said, "I would rather look on foes with my true face." Nonetheless, he accounted the helm among the greatest heirlooms of his house. Now Thingol had in Menegroth deep armories filled with great wealth of weapons, metal wrought like fish's mail, and shining like water in the moon, swords and axes, shield and helms, wrought by Telkar himself or by his master Gamil Zirak the Old, or by elven rites more skillful still, as elvish propaganda. For some things he had received in gift that came out of Valinor and were wrought by Feanor in his mastery, than whom no craftsman was greater in all the days of the world. Yet Thingol handed the helm of Hador, as though his hoard was scanty, and he spoke courteous words, saying, "Proud were the head that bore this helm, which the sires of Húrin bore." Then a thought came to him, and he summoned Túrin, and told him that Morwen had sent to her son a mighty thing, the heirloom of his fathers. "Take now the dragon head of the north," he said, "and when the time comes, wear it well." But Túrin was yet too young to lift the helm, and he needed it not because of the sorrow of his heart. So, a long passage, yes, but all the important things about the helm are there. And the important thing is that it has a big fuck-off image of a dragon on it. And it's hinted also that the runes engraved on it are dwarven spells and dwarven magic, as we discussed in the series I did on magic, if you want to go back and have a look at that. So now that we've talked about the helm, which is awesome, and Túrin goes on to use it to great effect, and we've talked about the knife Angrist, which, now I'm looking at it, I wonder if Philip Pullman was inspired by the subtle knife, because that was one of my favorite series of his Dark Materials. I started reading it again recently. It was one of my favorite series as a kid, and the subtle knife captured my imagination from a young age. A knife that was able to cut through anything, even between worlds. Interesting. For anyone who's around like my age, like in your 30s, and you read his Dark Materials, did anyone else want a daemon of their own or a demon of their own? I used to pretend my cat was when I was a kid, and I used to like pretend my cat was my demon. Oh dear. Anyway, right, let's talk about the sword. Narsil was forged sometime in the First Age, but it says it was forged in the deeps of time, which is an interesting way to put that, because it had to have been some time after the dwarves woke up, obviously, and Nogrod and Belagost kind of got going. Who knows? The name means red and white flame in Quenya, and it has Na, which is fire, and Thil, which is white light, Ithil, Naria, other elements you can see. And this was in reference to the sun and the moon, who were regarded as the chief heavenly lights, as enemies of darkness. There we go. That dates it even more. Of course it can't have been in the fucking deeps of time, because if it was after the sun and the moon rose, we know damn well when they rose. So why would you say the deeps of time when just give us a year, bro? Fuck. There is a song called the Narsilion, the song of the sun and the moon. And this song tells of the tree Telperion giving one last silver flower and the tree Laurelin giving one last single fruit of gold as they both died in Valinor. Remember after Ungoliant sucked the trees dry, sucked the golf ball through a hose pipe? So the two items, the flower and the fruit, were given to Aule, the smith, after Manwë blessed them and hallowed them, making them sacred. Aule and his smiths made vessels for these fruits and this flower that held the radiance of the true trees, and then Varda set them into the sky to become the lamps of Arda that would outshine the stars as they went across the sky on their appointed voyages. So, to say that Narsil shone with the light of the sun and the moon when you put it into that specific context is awesome. No wonder Sauron and his forces feared it, right? It was the symbol of ultimate defiance of them and their kind. And that is amazing. But that's all that's really said about Narsil. And it's, it ends up in the armories of King Thingol of Menegroth. And then for a way, it works itself into the hands of the humans of Numenor by way of Beren and Lúthien's descendant Elros, who's Elrond's brother, the first king of Numenor. And then it just drops out of history until the end of the Second Age when it comes into the hands of Elendil. He carries it to the Battle of Dagorlad outside of Mordor, where it rightfully scares the forces of Sauron, given everything I've just told you about it. The sword was broken in the Siege of Barad-dûr in the Valley of Gorgoroth, when Sauron wrestles with Gil-galad and Elendil. So when big fat lad Elendil falls, he breaks the sword, and Isildur, using the hilt shard, after Sauron's died, slices off Sauron's fingers with it and takes the ring. The sword and the shards are recovered and now come with Isildur. However, in the second year of the Third Age, Isildur dies when he's ambushed along the northern borders of the Gladden Fields as they march along. Now, Isildur and his forces are outnumbered 10-1 in this ambush, right? It's not exactly like the films. It's a battle. And if the terrain had been different, they would have been able to make a formation that would have allowed them to drive a wedge into the enemy, scatter them, and get away. But it just seems like fate was not with them that day. They were surrounded on like pretty much all sides in a ravine type thing, I think is how it's described. And he can't maneuver properly, and it's too late. He's walked into an ambush, right? So they can only form into ranks and draw back into a ring of shields. And this is quite similar this is how it seems that Aragorn fights at the Morannon, where they pull back into a ring of shields as well, thousands of years later. And they were also outnumbered massively. Another parallel to how the Morannon went, right? And I think this serves really well is if you look at the Battle of the Morannon and then the disaster at the Gladden Fields with Isildur leading at the Gladden Fields, Aragorn leading at the Morannon. I think that Aragorn would have suffered exactly the same fate as Isildur unless had the ring not been destroyed, right? And that, I think, is a Tolkien was, because this is an unfinished tales that he's rewriting this right up until his death. And I think that's it again. It's highlighting these parallels that the ring needed to be destroyed or evil would have won. It wasn't enough to just leave things. It wasn't enough to hide the ring or anything like that. Sauron would have won had the ring not been destroyed. So Isildur sees just how grim things are, and he turns to, I'm trying not to swear, I've realised I swear quite a lot. He turns to his esquire. Now, interestingly enough, I found this out when I was researching. An esquire is not the same as a squire. A squire is a servant. An esquire is a formal title for a gentleman. It's not quite the same thing. I always thought it was. But the sword needs to survive. And so, this passage is written that I'm going to read out to you now. The orcs were now drawing near. Isildur turned to his esquire. Otar, he said, I give this now into your keeping. And he delivered to him the great sheath and the shards of Narsil, Elendil's sword. Save it from capture by all means that you can find and at all costs, even at the cost of being held a coward who deserted me. Take your companion with you and flee. Go, I command you. Then Ottar knelt and kissed his hand, and the two young men fled down into the dark valley. Now let's go on, because fun fact, Ottar is the only name that is ever used to refer to this fella who escapes. But it's actually a title that means warrior or soldier, who, whilst fully trained, is not given the rank of Roken or knight. And Roken is a military rank, and it's a Quenya word that Dunedain use for the military rank. And it would also, ordinarily, it would mean that they were knights that formed the part of the cavalry, right? The root word in Quenya is Roko Quen, which elves use it just literally means horse person. There's no gender applied to it. It's just horse person. So it tells us that Numenor had a lot of cavalry and their senior knights were in the cavalry. So the sword escapes. Isildur dies. Bad times. And it was brought by the esquire titled Ottar to Imladris, to Rivendell, in year 3 of the Third Age, where the surviving heir of Isildur, his youngest son Valandil, took ownership of it. However, the blade was broken and the light was extinguished. Elrond did that little elvish prophecy thing and declared it would not be reforged until the ruling ring was found again and Sauron returned. And of course, everyone hoped that that wouldn't happen. The sword remained one of the heirlooms of the King of Arnor, and after the northern kingdoms fell, it remained an heirloom of the Rangers, though I doubt whether it was really removed from Rivendell. What would the point be? And we wouldn't hear about Narsil again until Aragorn was given the shards when he turns 20-year-old, along with the Ring of Barahir. He notably does not receive the Sceptre of Annúminas, which we're going to discuss all these things in a bit. Right, so he gets the ring, he gets the sword. Then in the year 3018 of the Third Age, the elven smiths of Rivendell reforged Narsil into the new sword, Anduril. Aragorn renames it, and it means Flame of the West in Kent Quenya. Ril means brilliance, and Andu comes from Andune, which means west, referring to Numenor. So it's the Flame of Numenor, right? There were some changes between Narsil and Anduril, stylistically. There was now the engraved mark of 7 stars, which is the Valacirca or Valakirka, which Varda sets into the heavens, right? This is way back in the actual deeps of time, that when Morgoth spreads darkness over Middle-earth, Varda puts stars into the heavens, a series of 7 stars, a constellation, as a signal of defiance that Morgoth would be overthrown and the Valar would not forget the people of Middle-earth. And today, in modern times, we call this the Big Dipper, or the Plough. It's that very real constellation in our world. 7 stars as a motif is used loads by elves, dwarves, and humans. For example, the dwarves in Durin's Crown. With the dwarves, the symbol of the House of Durin is 7 stars in a crown, because when Durin looks into Keled Zaram, or the Mirrormere, when he wakes up and wanders around and before he finds Khazad-dûm, he looks in and he sees in the stars, he sees above his head a crown of 7 stars, and it's those stars that he's seeing. So these stars on the sword are set between the engraved symbol of the rayed moon and the rayed sun and the crescent moon. And there's also runes and writing on the blade, but we're not really told what it says. The film version has some stuff on it, but that could be translated, but we don't get any specifics from Tolkien, unfortunately. So any writing you do see does tend to be from the film version, which is pretty cool. And I think it just says I was forged by Telkar in the deeps of time, or some shit like that. Or I was Narsil. I don't know. Anyway, Tolkien didn't write it. But when the Fellowship leave Lothlorien, Aragorn is given a sheath made by the elves that has tracery of leaves and flowers made with silver and gold, and it has the name and the lineage of the sword set in elven runes formed of gems. And this sheath, according to Galadriel, means, and I quote, "The blade that is drawn from this sheath shall not be stained or broken even in defeat." Which is pretty nice to say that history is not going to repeat itself. It's going to be different this time. Aragorn fights with the sword all through the War of the Ring, and it's referred to as the sword that was broken or the sword reforged, just like his toe. And after the War of the Ring, we're not sure what happens to it, but I would like to think, and I'd probably speculate, that it would be an heirloom of his house, right? There was a chance that it was with him when he died and remained with his body, but I don't know, it feels like too good of a weapon or symbol to pass up, right? And it's only the scepter and crown we get definitive reference to Aragorn handing those over to Eldarion. Everything else is kind of up in the air about whether or not he passes it over. Anduril isn't mentioned, so make up your mind on that bit, I guess. But I'd say probably Eldarion got it. Now, I think we're about halfway through. The Crown of Gondor is next. And if you haven't seen this, go and look up Tolkien's illustration. I will wait, pause it, just have a Google, because it looks goofy as fuck. And it's crazy. That's all I've got to say about it. Let's move on. No, I'm joking, right? We have to have a little bit about this. Look at the illustration of the Crown of Gondor. Pretty cool. But there's a letter 211, that talks about this a little bit more. A woman called Rona Bear wrote to Tolkien and asked Tolkien about the clothes that people in Middle-earth wore. She asked specifically if the Crown of Gondor was like that of a Valkyrie, or if they were as depicted on a packet of Gauloise cigarettes. Now, this led me on a little rabbit hole about branding cigarettes, because I was like, what the fuck? And I wondered, like, did they do a limited edition Lord of the Rings packet or something? And it turns out that these French fags, right, were introduced in 1910. But they do bear a striking resemblance to the Crown of Gondor as he himself drew it. So, with the timeline of these cigarettes are still going today, by the way, I think. So it's Gauloise, and their tagline is Liberté toujours. And they are French, obviously, but they are manufactured in Germany. So, yeah, who really won? Anyway, right, these French fags, they were introduced in 1910, so they were very popular all throughout, right? And they've got quite a distinctive taste, apparently. They're quite strong cigarettes. Their logo, go and look up Gauloise cigarettes. Gauloises. Because I couldn't believe this. I thought, okay, that can't be a coincidence. But then Tolkien denies this. He just says, nope, no, not really. So I do wonder, right? And I don't want to do this, but like, when we said Tolkien says, I didn't have much influence on my story, like blah, 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 blah. But soldiers used to get cigarettes in their rations. And I do wonder if during World War I, was Tolkien sat in a trench somewhere, smoking these cigarettes, looking at the packet, seeing the crown, and then later on, when he comes to start, because like his earliest work comes from about 1917, remember? 1915 at a push. That's still after the war started. So I do wonder if he might have seen these cigarette packets and it took some kind of influence from that. That's complete speculation, but yeah, go look at these two images I've talked about. But so she said, does it look like a Gauloise cigarettes crown, or does it look like a Valkyrie crown? And a Valkyrie crown, I just Googled it. It looked cool as shit, right? Well, I already knew what a Valkyrie crown looked like, because I love Norse stuff, but like, I wanted to see quite a few side by side. And yeah, it's pretty distinctive, and it is cool as shit. But his answer, now this really got me. I phoned Becca when she was at work, because I was excited to talk about this when I was researching it. Tolkien says in his answer to this letter that the Númenóreans of Gondor and of the Númenóreans of Arnor as well were very much more like the Egyptians in culture than anything else, in that they loved power and tombs. And it does make me like really wish for a Gondor series one day. But he says that the crown of Gondor was like a pharaoh's crown, being tall and having wings that was set back at an angle. And he said that the northern kingdom, Arnor, would have a diadem only, like a thin circular type one. And he says that the difference in headgear is like that of the difference between Upper and Lower Egypt in that there were different styles. And then obviously Becca is like half an Egyptologist. She's fucking loves this shit. She's been on like history holidays to like Egypt and shit. Like she loves it. So I phoned her up, and yeah, the Egyptian pharaohs for Upper and Lower Egypt had different crowns that would meant to fit together. So one does wonder, how far does that go? Does the diadem slot somewhere into the Gondorian crown? Who knows? But it said that the original crown of Gondor was a plain Númenórean war helm worn by the two kings in the battle of, the three kings, in the Battle of Dagorlad. However, as Anarion, who was the king of Gondor and Isildur's brother, they shared kingship, Anarion's helm was crushed when he died during the war. The helm of Isildur was after that used to crown the kings of Gondor from then. So a plain war helm was the crown until it was replaced by the 16th king, who swapped it out for a stately, ornate, jewelled helm. And this was during the days of the 16th king, Atanatar II Alcarin. Atanatar in Quenya means father of men, Atan, like Atani, the name for humans, and Atar, father. Alcarin means glorious because he was one rich bitch, right? He was crazy rich Asians. He was the Kardashians. He was every waste of human life you've seen on a streaming service. He was the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, right? He ruled in luxury in Gondor and he liked the finer things, which is a shame because it's proper Nepo baby, because he ruled over Gondor and neglected it at its height of splendor and power. He did nothing to maintain what his ancestors had done before him, and he also neglected the watch on Mordor, and that is where Gondor starts to decline again. And it was so rich in Gondor during his reign that it was said that precious stones were pebbles for children to play with. Now, I know people on the internet well enough to know that nuance and not taking things literally is a very difficult concept to grasp. So, not actual pebbles. I'm not like nobody was saying that there was actual like rubies in the street and shit. It's just a very poignant way to point out how rich they are. Okay, so chill out. Stop stimming. So, I've done you a kindness and explained what an exaggeration is. That's my good deed done. I'm going to go out and kick a puppy. Right. Aragorn receives his crown, the ornate crown, the second crown, on the 1st of May, 3019, after the downfall of Sauron. The tradition was that a new king received it from his father or retrieved it from his father's tomb. But since Aragorn could do neither of those things, Faramir went and fetched it for him, and I think he got it from the tomb of Eärendil, the last king of Gondor. Do you know, the one who went to try and fight the Witch King and got abducted? Aragorn then recited the Oath of Elendil, which I'll give you the oath and the translation. Et erello endorena utulien, sinome maruvan ahiltinaye ten ambarmeta. Out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place will I abide, and my heirs unto the ending of the world. Aragorn then returns the crown to Faramir and says for Frodo to take it, who passed it to Gandalf, who placed it on Aragorn's head and blessed him by saying, Now come the days of the king, and may they be blessed while the thrones of the Valar endure. This crown then passes to Eldarion in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, when Aragorn went to lay down in the House of Kings, and as was tradition, and Aragorn revives it, he passed it to his successor along with the Sceptre of Annúminas. Now, the Sceptre of Annúminas. I need to pause for a drink. My thrussy is going to be aching tomorrow. There are two sceptres that we want to talk about. What is a sceptre? It's a metal rod. There you go. So there are two sceptres to talk about in relation to the kings of Middle-earth, and I don't want you to get them confused. There is the Sceptre of Númenor and the Sceptre of Annúminas. The Sceptre of Annúmenor is gone, and it's pretty fucking cool where it's gone. So we'll talk about that in a sec. The sceptre that Aragorn has is the Sceptre of Annúminas, which represents him being the king of Arnor. So the sceptre is a symbol of the Northern Kingdom. The Sceptre of Númenor is a completely different item, and it represented being king of Númenor. This sceptre was held first by Elros, Elrond's brother, and the first king of Númenor, and it was this sceptre, not a crown, that symbolised kingship. It was passed down all the way from Elros to Ar-Pharazôn, who was the king during the downfall. And the old tradition used to be that the sceptre of Númenor was voluntarily surrendered to the heir of the king when he chose to die, which is one of the gifts that Númenorians had. You could choose when to die. What a fucking gift that'd be, by the way. Love that. So anyway, as the Númenorians became more and more afraid of death, this practice was abandoned because if you remember, I might have mentioned it, but Númenorian kings, they started to clench onto power. They held onto their seat with their arse cheeks clenched as long as they could. And it started to be that it was when old age took them and they died involuntarily that the sceptre was given up. It wasn't done voluntarily, which is a shame. But Aragorn resurrected this practice when he goes to die voluntarily in the year 120 of the Fourth Age and gives the sceptre to Eldarion. I mean, it also might have been before, other kings before Aragorn, because obviously the kings of Middle-earth of Gondor and Arnor descended from the good Númenorians. But the Sceptre of Númenor went with Ar-Pharazôn when he attacks Aman and Valinor. And if you, very, very quickly, Ar-Pharazôn, the downfall of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn is the one who causes it. He's manipulated by Sauron. He tries to attack the Valar, who are the little g gods of Middle-earth, in a place that humans aren't meant to go. As soon as he steps foot on the land, he fucks around and finds out, right? And the Sceptre of Númenor is currently in the Caves of the Forgotten, along with Ar-Pharazôn and his army. Now, what are the Caves of the Forgotten, you may say? And why are you talking about this during an Aragorn episode, Chris? Well, to answer your second question first, it's my podcast. I'll do what I want. To answer your first question, though, the Caves of the Forgotten are really cool. They are a myth within the story. So it's a myth. It's mythology itself within Middle-earth. It's not this happened. It's just this is a myth within a story. So when Ar-Pharazôn, the evil bastard, landed on the shores of Aman, where the Valar lives, he tried to invade the blessed realm of Valinor, right? And the chief of the Valar, Manwë, he says to God, Eru Ilúvatar, says to capital G God, Dad, I can't do this anymore. I give up my power over Middle-earth. You need to sort it out. That is when capital G God breaks the world and drowns the island of Númenor, as well as all the ships in the ocean. And he does this by drowning them in a giant abyss that opens up between Númenor and the shores of Aman. And it's also during this that Eru makes the world round. It used to be flat. You could go to the Blessed Realm if you could sail it well enough. But Eru makes the world round so that nobody can get to Aman. It's now removed entirely from the planet. But Ar-Pharazôn and his armies were already on the shores of Aman when this happened. They were camped near the hill of Tuna in a pass of the Pelori Mountains called the Calaciria, right? I talked about this way back in like the first 3-4 episodes, I think, of this podcast. These mountains are what protects the elves who live over there and the Valar from the rest of like Middle-earth, right? It stops anyone being able to see into them. But they leave a mountain pass there. They leave the pass just so they can let some fresh air in, basically, and they can let a little bit of the light of Aman spill out into the world. And it gives them a way to travel. And this is where all the armies are. So when Eru broke the world, it wasn't just the ocean, because it's said that the hills themselves fell on top of Ar-Pharazôn and his army. But this is the myth. These falling hills, legend has it, created a cave complex where they're not dead, that they are still alive, but they're trapped and they're waiting for the last battle, for the Ragnarok of Middle-earth, right? The apocalypse, where they will then be released to fight. Although, whose side will they fight on? We don't know. But I like that. I love that story, because the whole point of Ar-Pharazôn invading Aman and Valinor was that Sauron tricked him into thinking that this is how you become immortal. Just doing that. And I like to think that Ar-Pharazôn got the immortality he wanted, but in a way that he didn't anticipate, like a proper monkey's paw situation. So, that little interesting detour is to show you that the scepter that Aragorn has is not the same one. It's a different one. Instead, the one that he has is the Sceptre of Annúminas, and that is handed down from the descendants of the Lords of Andúnir in Númenor. The Lords of Andúnir were, to keep it very simple because it's not the focus of this series, the Lords of Andúnir were the good Númenorians. That's where Isildur's from, that's where his dad Elendil, his brother Anarion, they were descendants of the Lords of Andúnir, who were the faithful of Númenor. They always believed in like the Valar and Eru. They didn't get suckered in by Sauron. And they were punished for that, and they had to go and live in their own place on the, and it was called Andúnir, and they had a scepter of office, and that's where their scepter comes from. And these are the ones who made it to Middle-earth after the downfall of Númenor, obviously with the exception of some of the Black Númenorians who were at like Umbar and that, blah, blah, blah. But this scepter was a silver rod. It's a symbol of office held by each king of Arnor after the downfall of Númenor, Arnor North. Their capital city in Arnor was called Annúminas and was founded in the year 3320 of the Second Age by Elendil after he landed in Middle-earth. The city, Annúminas, became the capital of the realm for several centuries and held one of the 3 Palantiri of the North Kingdom. The number of people living there dwindled over the centuries due to the war against Sauron and Isildur's death. Like, people drifted away from the capital because lots of Dunedain were slain, so they started to become more of a wandering people because they were sparser, so they weren't as concentrated in a capital city like Annúminas. And eventually the city was deserted, and a new capital became a place called Fornost Erein. And it's worth noting that in Aragorn's reign, he rebuilds Annúminas and stays there. So it's back on the up, right? And Annúminas means Tower of the West in Sindarin. Annún, West, and Minas, Tower. In older versions of the story, Tolkien called it Tarkilmar or Westermanton. And that was also the name. There was also a name called Torgirion, which appears on the first Lord of the Rings maps, which is pretty cool, right? So I couldn't find what those stood for, but I imagine they all mean, fairly similar things. But in the year 861 of the Third Age, the last king of Arnor, Eärendil, dies, and his 3 sons argue and bicker amongst themselves, and eventually the kingdom, the North Kingdom of Arnor, is now splintered into 3 kingdoms. It's a pain in the ass, right? And these 3 kingdoms were called Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. The rod remains with the eldest son, who becomes the king of Arthedain, and he's called Amlaeth of Fornost. And it's speculated that it's only because of the jealousy of his 2 younger brothers that this split occurred in the first place. The important thing to remember is that these are the ultimate winners. They're the ones who endure, because Aragorn is a direct descendant of this guy, the King of Arthedain. The scepter stays with the kings of Arthedain and goes... So it starts in Númenor, it gets handed down through the Lords of Andúnier to Middle-earth, where it gets handed down from the kings of Arnor to their sons, or whatever, to their descendants, and then eventually through the kings of Arthedain. So the circle just keeps getting smaller and smaller of lands that are ruled over. And when the last king of Arthedain, Arvedui, dies in the Third Age 1975, this is all during the Witch King stuff, remember? The scepter is then kept in Rivendell by Elrond, who at this point, I imagine, feels a little bit taken advantage of because he's just becoming a storage unit for his brother's kids' shite. Like, oh yeah, just leave it at Uncle Elrond's house. Poor guy. So as mentioned, like Gandalf is just like, oh yeah, let's just store hobbits here as well. And pipeweed. Yeah, just chuck it all at Rivendell. So anyway, as mentioned briefly, Elrond withholds the scepter from Aragorn until he's ready for it. And he doesn't get it handed to him until after he's been crowned King Elessar of Gondor. And at this point, this scepter is over 5,000 years old, making it possibly one of, if not the, oldest work of craftsmanship by humans in Middle-earth. Unless somewhere down the back of one of Tolkien's drawers is a note that just says, by the way, it was made by an elf, which I wouldn't put it past him. But that's pretty cool. And I can see why that would be withheld from him. Because of how much history there is to it. Like, there's a lot there. That's crazy. But anyway, during Aragorn's reign as king in the Fourth Age, some of the northern lands, like the Shire, are said to be under the protection of the Northern Scepter, which is this. And I also assume that Eldarion, continued with it as an heirloom as long as their line lasted, blah, 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 because there's no note saying it was lost afterwards. And it is a symbol of office. My throat is hurting. Ow. Right. Palantiri. I honestly and ahed about this section so much about putting the Palantiri in. Ultimately, I decided that given I'm not sure what's happening with the podcast, I would include them here so that you've at least next time you watch the films, I meet the ultimate aim of this podcast, and it's like you'll be like, whoa, there's a lot more to the Palantiri than I thought. The Palantirs, right? Palantir. Technically, on a lore level, they're much more like Elvish, but given that how much they have to do in the Lord of the Rings story, and basically the most important things that occurs in the Lord of the Rings story, I'm going to talk about them here because it seems the best place, right? And I also can't remember how much I've talked about the Palantir stuff before. So I'll settle for we'll talk about them, right? The Palantiri, or Seeing Stones, are stones within Middle-earth that were probably made by Fëanor, the greatest elf craftsman ever. There's no definite answer on how many were made, but there were 7 of them in Middle-earth, and they crop up in history. There was a Master Stone, which was said to have power over all the other stones, and this stone rested in the Tower of Avalone on Tol Eressëa and looked out at the world. Now, Tol Eressëa, if you're not familiar, is an island that, again, you can't get to it ordinarily because the world is round now, so it's been removed. But special permission or elves who cross over the sea make it to Tol Eressëa. This is where Gimli, Sam, Frodo, Bilbo end up. Arguably as well, I think any of the elves that were exiled from Valinor and are then forgiven and allowed to return home, I think Tol Eressëa is where they get to live as well. But basically, it is it's the first stop to, it's pretty much heaven, right? You've got Tol Eressëa, and then that's the island, and then you've got the mainland of Valinor and the continent Aman and the country of Valinor where the Valar live. But Tol Eressëa, heaven on earth, right? It's heaven. So this is where the master stone of the Palantiri was. And people of great power, like willpower, etc., could see much more with the stones than just their immediate surroundings, right? And I think I even read once that some could even see back in time at events that had happened previously rather than just what was going on then. which is pretty interesting. And elves, during the downfall of Numenor, like it happened over centuries, elves were steadily made less and less welcome until eventually they were banned from from Numenor, sorry. So to comfort the faithful Numenorians, i.e. the Lords of Andúril, who Elendil and Isildur would be descended from, the elves brought them some Palantiri to comfort them, so that even though they couldn't come and see them, they could still communicate. So when Elendil escaped Numenor and went to Middle-earth, he took 7 Palantiri with him, and they were distributed. 3 were in Arnor, the north, and 4 were in Gondor, the south. And they were used for communication between the realms, but they were also used to spy on their enemies and see plans, see like what their enemies were up to. And the knowledge of the Palantiri was apparently never common knowledge, and only the most senior figures would even know about them, never mind get access, right? So these stones, one by one, dropped out of all knowledge or were lost forever. So we'll go over the fate of each of the stones. The first one is Elendil's stone, and this is quite special. This wasn't a stone that looked at any of the others. It was aligned to the Master Stone only in Tol Eressëa, and it wasn't able to communicate with any of the others. Instead, this one looked west across the sea to the island of Tol Eressëa, and from that you could get a glimpse of the Undying Lands. Now, what this is very significant is that this was a portal to looking at heaven. It could never see Numenor because Numenor was buried under the sea forever, but it would see Tol Eressëa and you would be able to glimpse Aman in the distance. They like that is a. Imagine if you could go to the top of the fucking the Rockefeller building, and at one of the telescopes you could see like Jesus waving at you from a cloud. It's like that. Like it's on that level, right? And after Elendil's death, the elves took this stone into their care, and no man used it again ever, allegedly. However, elves themselves, sound like a bit of a dick move there, the elves would go on pilgrimages to the tower it was kept in called Elostirion in Emenbereid, where it was stored. So they could look at Tol Eressëa and the shores of Valinor, right? It's just remember what they would see. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they could even see Vada, the Valar, Vada, as in the woman who put the stars in the sky, standing on top of the mountain Oyolosse, which is another word for Taniquetil, the tallest mountain in the world. That, again, go back to Rockefeller. Sometimes you could look into this telescope and see Jesus on a hike. That's crazy. And elves would go on pilgrimages to do this, to see this, right? And this tower, Elostirion, was a giant white tower built by Gil-galad for Elendil, and that's where he kept the stone, right? And it was the tallest of the 3 towers, and it faced west in a range of green hills in Western Eriador. So it sounds beautiful. And it was from one of these pilgrimages that they were coming back from when, and I was blown away to realise this, we actually run into them during the Fellowship of the Ring as the elf Gildor and his pals. When they meet Sam, Pippin and Frodo, when they're leaving the Shire on the 24th of September, Gildor and friends are actually coming back from looking like through the stone. They come back from looking at heaven to encounter the guy carrying the devil's servant's ring, which is that's the fucking holiday blues, isn't it? It's mad that. So this stone, this big main stone, was taken back to Valinor by Círdan the shipwright, the elf, when he let one of the only elves with a beard, when he left at the end of the Third Age. And in the year 1975 of the Third Age, again during the Witch King of Angmar type stuff, King Arvedui of Arnor drowned, and he took with him the other 2 Palantiri of Arnor, and this was the Amon-Sul stone and the Annúminas stone. So the Amon-Sul stone was pretty big, and it couldn't be lifted by one man. And this stone used to rest at Weathertop, Amon-Sul, right? And when the kingdom splintered, so when the North Kingdom became 3 because of those fighting brothers, this stone was fought over constantly. It was in danger a lot. People, because Amun-Sul, Weathertop, is pretty much the point where the three kingdoms would meet, so they were always fighting over it. Yeah, crazy. So that was lost when Arvedui drowned in 1975, and Amun-Sul just became Weathertop. And then the Annúminas stone, again, the capital city, or the old capital city, Annúminas. This one was actually considered the lesser of the northern stones, but it was the one that was used most by the kings of the north. Like, it wasn't as powerful, but it was smaller and more portable, I think. So in the year 1974, the King Arvedui fled north from the Witch King to the people of Lossoth of Forakel. And these are like the snowmen, what's the politically correct term for Eskimos now? Those people. But with both stones, so he had the Annúminas stone and the Amun-Sul stone when he fled, when the Witch King of Angmar invaded Arthur-9. So Arvedui boarded a ship sent to help him against, and he did this against the advice of the Lossoth people. They said, don't go in the water, the ice will fucking kill you. So he goes in the water, and the ice fucking kills him. The ship was crushed by ice, and he drowns, taking the 2 stones with him. So that's the 3 stones gone, dealt with. Now, the 4 southern stones. Gondor had a bit of a civil war called the Kinstrife. A lot of it was to do of racial purity. I'm not even being hyperbolic there. That is a big part of it. A king was deposed because they thought he wasn't the right blood. Turns out he was. So anyway, during Gondor's civil war, the Osgiliath stone, again, Osgiliath was the capital of Gondor for the longest time, remember? And that's where Isildur and Anarion used to rule together. So in the Third Age, the year 1437, the Osgiliath stone is dropped into the River Anduin when the city is burned. Right, so Osgiliath gets messed up during the Civil War. And unfortunately, the Osgiliath stone was the most powerful of the Palantiri brought to Middle-earth, and was allegedly the only one that could secretly listen when other users were talking to each other. And it was previously held in the Tower of the Dome in Osgiliath. Either a massive building that looked like a planetarium, or a place you could go and get a blowjob. Importantly, the Osgiliath stone was so big it couldn't be lifted by a single man, unlike others which were small and could be held in 1 or 2 hands, like me. Boom. In 2002 of the Third Age, Minas Ithil fell, and whilst the humans thought the stone was destroyed, they agreed to stop using the stone that was held in Minas Tirith, called the Anor stone, to prevent any contact with Sauron in case he captured it instead of destroying it, which was a good move because he had captured it. Very quickly, Minas Ithil in the films, that's the one Frodo and Sam are right outside of when they had to start climbing those stairs. Ithil means moon, Minas means tower, tower of the moon. It was twinned up with the stone in Minas Anor, tower of the Anor sun, tower of the sun. After Osgiliath is burned, after Minas Ithil falls, Minas Anor becomes Minas Tirith, Tower of the Guard, which is the name you would know it as in the films. So, when Minas Ithil fell, Sauron captured the stone there. And all the stewards said, let's not use this, and for over 1,000 years, they listened. Almost 1,000 years. They listened. Until ultimately, our favourite tomato eater, Denethor II, thought he was hot shit and tried to use it late in the Third Age. He even stupidly tried to combat Sauron through it in a battle of wills. Instead, it aged him badly. So when Denethor committed suicide on his funeral pyre, he was still holding the Palantir. This caused it to be ruined for most people forever after, because unless you were someone exceptionally powerful like Aragorn or Gandalf, all you would see is the imprinted, psychic agony or what of Denethor as he died, which is 2 flaming hands, which is horrific. Like, his last moments are burned as a psychic afterimage into the Palantir. So that's 3 of the southern stones. You've got Osgiliath, drowned. Minas Ithil, Sauron's got it. Minas Anor/Minas Tirith, Denethor had it. The last one is the Orthanc Stone, which is held at Orthanc, and where our good pal Saruman grabbed it. So this was a stone in Orthanc that the steward Beren of Gondor thought Saruman would keep it safe when he gave him the keys to Orthanc. Instead, this is how Saruman got himself snatched up by Sauron. This is how he got dominated. This is how he got tricked and whatever. But this is the stone that Pippin grabs hold of and foolishly, tuckishly uses it, or tries to, after Wormtongue throws it at them. And doing all this research on the Palantiri, I fully understand why. I'm surprised Saruman didn't fucking beat him to death, to be fair. After realizing just how powerful it was, and he's thrown it out the window. Whoops. So the newly formed Gondorians, this is early in the Third Age, they make the Tower of Orthanc and they put their Palantir here because it's the northern border of Gondor. When Saruman comes into the picture, he knows that the stone is there and he bides his time hoping to get access to it, and he waits for years and years and years, and he does when Beren, the steward, eventually lets him move into Orthanc. And he's by this point, I think that they have forgotten about it. The Gondorians have forgot about the Palantir because it's not widely known. And Saruman's like, oh, I'll go into Orthanc. Yep, I'd love to go in there. Of course. Whoop. So, Sauron uses the Minas Ithil stone to bend the Orthanc stone to his will, and that's how Saruman gets got. Pippin uses this stone to cause Sauron to think he was the one with the ring. Do you remember that meme? Bad news. Pippin told Sauron everything he knows. Good news, Pippin doesn't know shit. It's that. Afterwards, Aragorn then strategically uses the stone to reveal himself to Sauron and shows him his massive throbbing sword that caused so much damage to his hand so long ago, and says, come on, big boy, can you get your finger around it this time? This spurs Sauron into thinking that Aragorn has the ring and prompts open war, which is what gives Frodo and Sam their chance in Mordor. See how it's all connected? So that's the 4 southern stones of Gondor, right? Meaning we've covered all 7 in Middle-earth, which is great, plus the bonus 8th one in Tol Eressëa. Etymology-wise, in terms of... I think this is a joke, right? I think that the Palantiri etymology is a joke because it just means television. It Palantir is Quenya, meaning seeing from afar. Palan, far, Tir, watch over. Those that watch from afar. And then you've got the Greek tele, meaning far off, and vision, to see. So to me, it's like Palantir is a television. It's literally translated as television, which is, I think, is fucking amazing. And the Sindarin name is Gwaihir, which, cool. But apparently the inspiration for these is that Tolkien had them appear in the story unexpectedly. There was these little lore rhymes that he had where you already had it in mind. You know, there's little all that glitters is in gold, that type of stuff, right? So you already had this poem in mind, and the rhyme was 7 stars and 7 stones and 1 white tree. And when he was writing that, the Palantir just appeared in his head as like, oh, the Palantir of Orthanc appeared, and he's like, okay, there's 7 of them, and that's where it came from. And in that regard, it seems very much like how Ents were created, where it was when he was writing the book that Treebeard appeared as a character, and he was like, oh, okay. And then he goes back and adds the history in later. So it might have been, it sounds very similar there. Right, and we're going to cover the last one today, this has been a very long episode. I hope this has been as enjoyable for you to listen to as it has been for me to research and talk to you about. So I've had a whale of a time. But we're going to talk about the Ring of Barahir. The Ring of Barahir was also known as the Ring of Felagund, which was an ancient and well-used ring, just like your mum's. It was an enduring sign of friendship between elves and humans, and it had a few owners over the year as the ring slipped from finger to finger, just like your mother. And it originally belonged to Finrod Felagund before being given to Barahir, to Beren, to Elros, through all the kings of Númenor, to Silmarien, who was the king's eldest daughter, eldest child who was a woman, to then the lords of Andúnier, to the kings of Arnor, to the chieftains of the Dúnedain, to Aragorn, to Arwen as her wedding ring. That's the line it goes down. This ring was 2 serpents with emerald eyes and crowns of golden flowers, which is also the House of Finarfin, the Elvish House of Finarfin's symbol. It was made way back during the years of the trees in Valinor by the Noldor elves, and it left Valinor with them during their exile. And during one of the main battles of the First Age, the Dagor Bragolak, or the Battle of Sudden Flame, this is where Morgoth unleashes lava and fire from the mountain Thangorodrim, and it produces deadly fumes and chokes out a plain that becomes Ardgallen, which then becomes known as like a wasteland called Anfauglith. And this allows Morgoth to break out of Angband, which has been under siege. That's why he's suddenly sprang out. It's to break the siege because all the elves are out in front of his house. Many elves died and humans, and the battle was on. And this was in the year 455 of the First Age. So during this battle, Finrod Felagund was surrounded and cut off from allies at the Fen of Seric. He had only a small company with him, and he would have been killed or captured had he not been saved by the human Barahir and his 12 followers. They cut through the enemy to reach Finrod with heavy losses, and they allow him to escape. As thanks for this, Finrod gives him the ring and a vow of enduring friendship. It is a story that I cannot do justice to the heroism on show, right? I can't do it in the small time I've got with this. But all the battles of Beleriand are like this. They are beautiful, heroic, heartbreaking, chaotic. It's fucking amazing. So Barahir wore this ring for the rest of his life, which wasn't very long, because 5 years later, in the year 460, there was a massacre at Tarn Eluin, which sees Barahir and his band of outlaws betrayed by a guy called Gorlim the Unhappy, who misses his wife, Eilenel, and is tricked by Sauron into giving out the location of his companions and thinking he'll see her again. It was a trick. Barahir and his followers were slaughtered by orcs, and there's only Beren, who's away from home at the time, of Beren and Luthien fame, survived because he just wasn't there, and he sees a vision of Gorlim the Unhappy, and so he rushes back to the hideout. Beren gets back, he sees his dad, Barahir, is dead, so the rest of the gang. So he chases down the orcs who did it, and he finds their camp. And the orc captain is there, and he's got Barahir's hand, and he's holding it up, and he's boasting about killing Barahir, and he's holding up the hand with the ring still on it. So Beren jumps out of the bushes and kills the captain, grabs his dad's hand, and flees. He runs away. And he lays the hand to rest with the rest of his dad, but he keeps the ring. Now, Beren then becomes a fierce wanderer, doing all kinds of mad shit, and he eventually makes his way to Doriath, where he meets Luthien, and on with the story of Beren and Luthien. So, he is then eventually tasked by King Thingol to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown if he wants to marry Luthien. So Beren, during this quest to steal the Silmaril, 5 years later, in the year 465, he goes to Nargothrond and asks Finrod Felagund, the guy who gave his dad the ring, he asks for his help to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. And ultimately, this leads to Finrod's death because he agrees to help him, and they go with him and Beren, and then they take 10 elves, but they all end up in the dungeons of Sauron in the first Minas Tirith, Tower of the Guard, on an island called the Isle of Tol Sirion. However, Sauron's invaded, he's took it over, it's all kind of horrible shit now, so this island is now called Tol Ingalroth, the Isle of Werewolves. And this is where Finrod Felagund makes good on his oath to Barahir, because Beren escapes as Finrod first fights Sauron in a magical rap battle, Then he kills a werewolf with his hands and teeth before dying in the process in the dungeons of the tower he himself had built. That is metal as fuck. Finrod is the one who built the tower that they are in. Crazy. So it's all good though, right? Because of how awesome he is. So because of all his heroism, Finrod Felagund was allowed to reincarnate early. So elves normally have to go through a period of reflection or re-education before they're allowed to back into a body, and then they get to stay in Aman, Valinor for forever until the end of time. Cool. Finrod, he gets let out early for good behaviour because of all of his good deeds. And I'm very happy to say, I texted him the other day, and he's very happy with his dad, Finarfin, and his girlfriend, Amarie. So they are just chilling in Aman. So Finrod has a very happy ending, despite the way he dies. After this, we don't hear much about the ring. It finds its way to Dior, who is son of Beren and Luthien, and he goes on to write a lot of great rock music. It then goes to his daughter, Elwing, and it goes to her son, Elros, who is the first king of Númenor. It then remains an heirloom of the kings of Númenor until we get to the fourth king, and this guy is called Tar Elendil, and he breaks tradition because in Númenor, it's primogeniture. That it means it has to go, the title of the king title has to go to the oldest son, but he has a daughter who is the oldest. So even though his son becomes king, his daughter, Silmarien, gets the ring as the heirloom. And that is how she has a son called Valandil, who becomes the first Lord of Andúnier, from whom we get the scepter. So it's all come full circle, right? I hope you trusted me to bring you on the journey. So these lords remain the faithful, and eventually the ring is able to escape the downfall of Númenor and come to Middle-earth along with the scepter, along with the Palantiri, along with, well, I guess the crowns, along with the sword. Everything comes from it manages to survive. From there, the ring follows the same path as the Sceptre of Annúminas. Goes from Elendil to Isildur's son Valandil, then through the northern kings to the last king of Arnor, Earendir, then through the kings of Arthedain until the fall of Arvedui. And this is where it differs, because Arvedui passes the ring to the chief of the Lossoth of Foricel, the snowmen I talked about earlier. He passes the ring to them as a thanks for sheltering him and helping him. And he tells, when he's about to get on the boat, he tells these snow guys, ransom it back to the Rangers of the North and they will pay a very high price for it as thanks. And he does. They do, right? It works. And they do like buy it back for like great riches, which is good. And it's after this that it goes into Rivendell. And it's held there along with all the other loot for Aragorn, who is starting to sound like someone who pre-orders a game. So as soon as it comes out, he unlocks a load of mad shit, which is just a bit of a Nepo baby, isn't he? So Aragorn receives the ring in the year 2952 of the Third Age, along with the Shards of Narsil, but doesn't get the Sceptre of Annúminas, and of course the crown is, I think the crown's at, no, it's not at all, the crown's in the Tomb of the Kings, and what have you. But in the year 2980 of the Third Age, Aragorn gives the ring to Arwen when they get betrothed. And she's his cousin, as I've mentioned before. So they are really just keeping it all in the family. And now you're starting to see with all these powerful families how it's really handy how all the riches and the power all stays within some very powerful bloodlines. Really interesting, that, isn't it? I wonder if, let's say, their last name was, I don't know, like Trump, maybe, Rockefeller, Rumsfeld, Weinstein, would this change the tone of the story if we look at it through that lens? Very interesting. So then we melt into the Fourth Age, and either Arwen takes the ring with her to her grave at Cairn Amroth, or it was passed to Eldarion along with other stuff to inherit, and then passed on to the descendants of the United Kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor as long as that line lasted, blah, 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 blah. Who knows? Because recently, Becca's gran passed a few years ago, and recently her granddad gave her her grand's engagement and wedding rings. And I know it's quite common to have a wedding ring or an engagement ring that is an heirloom as well. So makes more sense to pass it to Eldarion, I guess. Or if Eldarion was married, maybe Arwen gave it as a betrothal, like gave it to the wife or the betrothed. Who knows? Who knows? But that's it. That is that's most of Aragorn's heirlooms. There might be some things I've missed. Like I didn't talk about the cloaks from Galadriel because why the fuck would I? I think it might just be I can't remember. If it's a film thing only when he takes Boromir's braces. Um, I can't remember, but I didn't want to talk about that. The knife, I'm pretty sure, might just be a film thing, or it's at least the significance of it, where it like goes to alerts and stuff, was mainly for the film. Yeah, I think we got it all. But go tell me if I've missed anything crazy, and you're like, "Oh my god, Chris, I can't believe you didn't talk about his magical underwear because Aragorn was a Mormon." Like for stuff like that. But yeah, what a journey this has been. 5 parts on Aragorn. I'll have to check. I'm pretty sure it's 5 parts on Aragorn. But wow, we are at the end. And just as we're sneaking into 2026, it's going to be out in the next hour or so. So I don't anticipate anyone's going to listen tonight. Because if you're like me, you'll be in bed soon. But otherwise, you'll be out. And yeah, it's been a good one. I hope that 2026 brings you peace and prosperity. And I hope that you meet life with the stoicism that it deserves when things are going shitty and the appreciation that it needs when things are going good. Because, I've got to remember there's always ups and downs, but this too shall pass. So just, hope you're having a good time. Appreciate the good moments. Appreciate when your nose isn't blocked. Appreciate when your throat's not hurting. And when these things do happen, just remember the times it wasn't. Got no more wisdom to share than that. So I will see you when I see you. Expect me when you see me. And for now, it's goodbye from me, Chris. Bye.